Okay, so if you're just joining us now, thank you for being here until the end, until the final plenary, which we've all been looking forward to very much, I'm sure. And after Professor Blitvich's plenary, we'll just have, I promise, no more than about 5 minutes of closing remarks, and Professor Bezoyden, who will announce the awardees of the AMPRA Grad Student Awards. So it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to have this opportunity to introduce our final plenary speaker, Professor Pilar Garcés-Conejos Blitvich, whose contributions to the field of linguistic pragmatics have been both extensive and significant. In particular, Pilar has developed the subfield of discursive pragmatics, and by doing so, she's helped to advance our understanding of context-based meaning by moving from the theoretical to the empirical, especially where the intersection of linguistic politeness, impoliteness, morality, and social identities are concerned. Over the last few decades, Dr. Blitvich has sustained an impressive record of numerous high-quality publications, having edited several important volumes and written dozens of influential journal articles and book chapters. Many of these are among my favorite pieces of scholarship. And over the course of engaging with Pilar's scholarship throughout my own career, I've marveled at her ability to elegantly apply pragmatic theories of meaning-making to countless examples of social media discourse, from political YouTube comments to multilingual Facebook posts. And language use in digital media is, without a doubt, the domain where Dr. Blitvich's work has been the most influential in recent years. As can be attested even from the program of this year's AMPRA conference, Internet pragmatics represents a major growth area in our field with vast potential for innovations and contributions, and Pilar has done plenty of both. Over the last 6 or 7 years, her scholarship has addressed a topic of major contemporary relevance, that is, how so-called cancel culture is enacted on and fomented by various social media platforms. Professor Blitvich is literally an academic trailblazer in this area, and if you haven't yet read her articles about online public shaming or the stereotypical social figure of the Karen, then I highly encourage you to go do so right after her talk. Professor Blitvich's scholarship on these topics helps us come to grips with current social trends that would be difficult to grasp in their full complexity without her thoughtful analyses and profound insights. And as I close, I would be remiss if I did not at least mention her most important contributions to the profession as well. These include her role in launching new journals. She's the co-founding editor of Journal of Language, Aggression, and Conflict, a Q1 journal, as well as in launching several new conferences, such as the ADA, Approaches to Digital Discourse Analysis Conference, which we were lucky enough to host here in 2022, when we still had a bit of COVID left, but no hurricane. And finally, I want to close by mentioning a few qualities that are not directly observable from her CV or from her Google Scholar account. And those are Pilar's warmth, her kindness, generosity, and her ardent support for graduate students, early career researchers, and for her colleagues who are not so junior anymore, especially. Will you please join me in welcoming Professor Pilar Blitvich, whose final plenary talk we've been so eagerly anticipating. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Camila, for this very lovely introduction, which is very much appreciated. Thanks also to you, Camila, to Anne, and the rest of the organizing team for your kind invitation to be here today, and also for your professionalism and for your efficacy in dealing with unfortunate and very difficult circumstances. Thank you also to the audience for being here today after 3 days of very, very interesting talks. So today, I would like to discuss my findings and my proposal about intergroup pragmatics. My talk is going to be divided in 2 parts. One is the theory part and the other the application. I'm sorry that I'm going to be a little bit theory intensive today, but I thought you guys were the perfect audience for discussing this type of advancing pragmatic theory. So but there's data, there's application, it's just coming up later. So I would like to start by discussing how I began to think about intergroup communication, then discussing the differences between interpersonal and intergroup communication, advocating the reason why we need an intergroup pragmatics, and to do so, the ways around the hurdles that we may have to conceptualize an intergroup pragmatics. So as Camila said, I've been working on cancel culture and its tools such as online public shaming, unrelated topics for about 5-6 years. And at the time, in some ways, still today, these phenomena are pretty much uncharted territory for discourse analysts and pragmaticians. And what I found is that I needed tools to tackle and ways to think about a fundamentally collective phenomenon. This is what led me to formulate or attempt to formulate a pragmatics of intergroup communication. So what we know is that pragmatics, politeness scholarship, but both at the utterance and discourse level, has mostly focused on interpersonal communication. So interpersonal communication are those, is the individual identity of the interlocutors when it is most salient. So it is those self-categories which define the individual as a unique person and different from other in-group members. So regarding intergroup communication, which is less known, Giles has worked extensively on it, and he argues that many people feel that intergroup communication involves clusters of people on one hand, clusters of people on the other, that are in conflict or tension, such as, for example, protesters and police officers, protesters, counter-protesters, and so on. However, intergroup communication refers to interaction where participants' group identities, their clans, cliques, unions, generations, families, gender, almost entirely dictate the conversational dynamics. And here you have a few, we have also discussed a few, during the talks these days, but like doctor-patient communication, stylist-client, interfaith, professor-students, football fans, a lawyer, or judge, jury, right? So all of that, who you are as a person matters a little bit less in this type of interaction. What it is true is that the boundaries between personal and social identity are very porous, and the latter plays a major, sometimes argue more highly pervasive role in communication. As Giles said, Henry Teifel had always argued that at least 72% of so-called interpersonal interactions were actually highly intergroup in nature, but this could perhaps even turn to be an underestimate. So why do we need an intergroup pragmatics? So there seem to be many communicative phenomena that cannot be accounted for in interpersonal terms, but are collective in nature and should be understood by recourse to a group. For instance, interactions where those involved, as I said, occupy positions afforded to them by a recognized social identity, such as, for example, employer-employee, in a corporate meeting, or Black Lives Matter supporter in a demonstration. Further, there are certain actions which cannot be performed at the individual level because they emanate from the group, and as such need to be carried out by it or emissaries acting on its behalf. Among these, we find groups' reprisal to members' breaching of social norms, which is what involves degradation ceremonies, social norms that in themselves are quintessential group phenomenon, as we will see, and of course, cancel culture is a prime example of this. And then, and this is, I'm not going to talk about this today, but this is the second part of my project. I've finished with cancel culture. I've already said everything I had to say. But now I'm looking at reintegration in group by undoing degradation, moral reconciliation, and forgiveness. Okay, but all of these are collective in nature. So, I mean, I'm not saying that pragmatics has not looked at interpersonal and intergroup communication. There's a lot of communication in professional genres, service encounters, health encounters, courtroom, political settings, among others, gender. All of those are instances of social identity being salient. Of course, intercultural, cross-cultural, contrastive pragmatics, looks at national, ethnic, language, culture groups. So all of those are part of intergroup communication. However, in my view, the constraints placed on communication by occurring intergroup have not been sufficiently explored. And intergroup communication has often been approached from an interpersonal perspective. So why do I think this happens? I think this may be due to the dominance of rational choice theory, a spin-off of methodological individualism. Methodological individualism espouses that every human activity can be reduced to individual levels of subjectivity in action, such as interests, intentions, motives, concerns, decisions, even if it is eminently social. Rational choice theory, driven by the maximization of individual profit, both material and symbolic, proceeds by means of calculated, intentional, and rational decisions by individuals. So if you think about this, it is not difficult to trace strong parallels between the tenets of methodological individualism and those of foundational models and theories of pragmatics, such as, for example, Brannon Levinson politeness and the rational model person, Leach's characterization of pragmatics as eminently strategic and as rhetorical, a means to an end, and the speaker-centeredness and intentionality that dominates speech act theory and Grice's framework, among others. Also important is the influence of different versions or radical versions of rational choice. People never seem to communicate or they communicate only in dyadic logical dialogue. Dyadic communication has also been a staple in pragmatics, which is also a hurdle to tackling genres that involve collective engagement and polylogal interaction. So with such a strong bias towards individualism, it has not been easy to conceptualize the social fact, the collective, according to Durkheim in pragmatics. But I think we need a way forward. As Durkheim argued, the groupthink feels and acts quite differently from the way in which its members would were they isolated. So, we just need a way forward thinking about collectivity. So, when I was faced with these problems, when I was working on my project, I came up with a proposal, a way of conceptualizing the collective in pragmatic terms. So this proposal is based on three main foundations. The first is to change our focus to identity, to look at collective intentionality, and then to look at discursive pragmatics, especially the meso level, which is the level of group practices, the level of groups. So in pragmatics, for example, not perhaps many, but certainly within Impolina's research, there have been discussions about groups. Okay, so the core concept for Impolina's is face. But face was conceived as individualistic, an attribute of a rational model person, and this was immediately critiqued from scholars from collectivistic-oriented cultures. A problem has always been, so can face be accrued over time? If it is accrued over time, then it can be attached to groups. But if it is emergent in interaction, it could not be shared by groups. It is unlikely that all members would be interacting concurrently. So, this has been like a conceptualization problem within Impolina's studies. O'Driscoll, for example, said, sort of reflecting this fuzzy state of the question, it is again not clear how group face is to be distinguished from the self-evidently valid concept of a group's reputation, image, or identity. Spencer Roti has been an exception in conceptualizing social identity face, the desire for acknowledgement of one's social identities or roles. So my idea, and I have been advocating this since the early 2000s, is to bring identity into conceptualizations of politeness, because, social identity is, of course, also discursive, co-constructed in interaction, but often it is enregistered for both voluntary and involuntary groups. I have very strongly argued that face and identity co-construct each other, and groups can have face because it is an integral part of their group identity. So, once you claim and are ratified in a group identity, members are positioned as assuming certain goals, right? Clearly, there are core members, marginal members, and there's always intergroup conflict. But if you claim and are ratified in a group identity, more or less, I can understand or I can predict what your goals are. So another problem, thorny, even for regular pragmatics, is intentionality, right? So, intentionality has played a very important role in pragmatic understandings of the conveyance and interpretation of meaning. In later times, it has been questioned by some as a priori concept. We intentions have been discussed, for example, by Ho, who was not very happy with, stand discussions of we intentions and, found them very static and not flexible enough for, for application to emergent interaction. So, I don't think we have gone much further than that, that I'm aware of in terms of discussing way intentions. But of course, there are other fields that have really worried about intention. For example, within philosophy, they have worried about the ontology of group agents. So when a team plays, is the team just made of individuals coordinated in search of a common goal, or is the team itself that plays, right? So, responses to these questions have been taken up by two opposing camps, individualism and collectivism. So individualism understands and explains both individual action and social ontology, resorting to individuals and their relations and interactions, where collectivism argues that there are genuinely emergent social phenomena, such as social objects, group in this case, states, fact, event, and processes. Within this, this idea of collectivism, people have also looked at shared intention and whether they can be reduced to individuals, so that a group intentionality can be reduced to the individual intention of the members, or they are not reductive. In other words, there's a we mode versus an I mode, as espoused by Tuomela. So, even here, there doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement. At least that is what I gathered when I checked the literature. However, knowledge about groups carries very important, sometimes vital information, and impacts attitudes, behaviors, such as in-group bias, implicit bias, moral obligations. So it seems essential for humans to be able to categorize others as members or non-members. And not surprisingly, children as young as 3 can using mutual intentions, that is the general agreement of individuals that they belong to a group, as a guiding principle closely connected to perceived common goals. So what is very interesting is that everything sort of comes together because, what distinguishes us as human beings, language, morality, evolved as groups evolved. So Thomas Hello discusses 3 stages in the evolution of morality: self-interest, way before me, and morality of right and wrong. And especially the third one is closely connected to collective intentionality. It developed about 150,000 years ago, and it's like as groups grew and society became more complex, the smaller bands that made up a tribe developed a set of common practices that represented the formal beginning of human cultures. So a set of norms, conventions, and institutions emerged to define the group's goals and establish divisions of labor that set roles for each of its members. So this is collective intentionality, and these goals were internalized in turn by each tribe as an objective morality of right or wrong, in which everybody knew immediately the difference between right and wrong as determined by the group set of cultural practices. So this collective intentionality is really how people are transformed from a random collection of individuals into a group, and that is the way they think about what they're doing together. This way of thinking constitutes the focus of collective intentionality, which is a super concept. The conceptual and psychological features of joint or shared actions and attitudes and their implications for the nature of social groups and their functionings, Collective intentionality subsumes the study of collective action, responsibility, reasoning, thought, intention, emotion, phenomenology, decision-making, knowledge, trust, rationality, cooperation, competition, as well as how these underpin social practices, organizations, conventions, institutions, and ontology. So it's a major concept. So, important for, especially what I'm looking here, is that collective intentionality is seen as a foundation for, the social norms, which emanate not from the individual, but from group opinion. So conforming to social norms displays group identity, going back to identity. Not abiding by them signals disdain for the group. That is why punishment for the laggard needs to be by the group as a whole, so that when an individual enforces a social norm, she's in doing so, in effect, an emissary of the group as a whole. So we already see how, identity, collectivity are coming together. And morality. So as Durkheim said, man is a moral being only because he lives in society. Let all social life disappear, and morality will disappear with it, which in a way, if you think about, levels of different anonymity online, sort of have led to, similar situations. So the third part of my proposal has to do with looking at discourse pragmatics rather than at, so most models, initial models of pragmatics were Atheron-based, right? So there have been pushes, within the field to tackle a discourse pragmatics, right? So when you think about discourse, there's traditional three interconnected levels of inquiry have been identified, which has the macro, the meso, and the micro. And they depend, on, they may be defined differently depending on the location, size, or scale of the research target. So the macro, refers to the social cultural framing. The meso units refer to genre framing, which is closely related to groups and communities of practice, which speaks to what I'm discussing here today. And the micro refers to specific local interactions, which is, referred as interpersonal framing. So, I've always thought this Fairclough's model that he put forth in 2003 is a great way to conceptualize discourse, right? From the macro, the meso, and then the micro, and the instantiation of texts. And then, how everything, how every level is dynamic. So it's not a top-down, but it's also bottom-up, right? So even in my view, when pragmatics has tried to be more discursive, it has tended to focus more on the macro and the micro levels, leaving the meso level underdefined or under-conceptualized. So in itself, the meso level has been one of the most debated and problematized dimensions of social theory and sociology. But what scholars agree on is that social order is embodied in patterns of social relationships occurring in different domains and scales, as seen in the similarities of individual behaviors, as in the regularities encounters between human agents, the establishment of groups and organizations, as in the functionings of institutions and the distribution of social resources. So a focus on groups on the meso level enriches both structural and interactional approaches, so macro and micro approaches, because groups constitute the social order, just as groups themselves are constituted by that order. So that importantly, the meso level not only mediates the macro and the micro, but also has semi-autonomous properties and dynamics that shape everyday life. Even within pragmatics, it has been argued that the meso-level concepts do have an important role to play in teasing out the role context plays in assessments of politeness, of impoliteness. I would argue, in general, every single pragmatic phenomenon. Indeed, we suspect that it is at the meso level that the most important work in theorizing politeness and impoliteness is more likely to occur. Okay, so the thing is, we think just looking more closely at groups, group research is very old, not for pragmatics, but importantly, I wanted to focus on this distinction, the distinction between thick and light groups. So thick groups include traditional demographic categories such as race, gender, ethnicity, class, etc., and tight-knit established networks in which people share many norms, values, more stable collective representations. And then on the other hand, there's these light groups, which are less conspicuous forms of relationship and social interaction, which involve moments of tight but temporary groupness. I'm really interested in light groups because I've done a lot of digital research, and light groups are common offline, but they are very closely related to online interactions, such as those that form around particular configurations of communicative resources such as memes, conspiracy theories, online platform challenges, and to what has been labeled the network society, which crucially has substantially altered the essence and understanding of groups, as they cannot be contained within traditional boundaries. So this, when I was researching cancel culture, I was very interested in finding out whether light groups can become agents. Do they have agency? Can they carry out goals, right? Because it is mostly thick groups that have been seen as constituted group agents, agents, a group organized to have a group level representation and motivation, the capacity to act on their basis, right? So Elaine was describing universities today, NBC, the House of Representatives have systems in place to process individual voices, opinions into a singular voice. Importantly, the beliefs, decisions, and actions we attribute to the group are not necessarily reducible to the beliefs of individual. So can light groups become agents? That became a huge part of what I wanted to find out. And I anticipating this, but I will argue that they can, and that in different ways from thick groups. And what makes the two processes similar is the claiming of certain social identities, the establishments of common goals, the emotional investment, and the involvement in collective action to achieve said goals. I will also argue that in case of the light groups that engage in online cancellation, online spaces play a key role in facilitating group activity and agency. Okay, so this concludes the first part, the theory part of my presentation. And what we have discussed so far is, that we need to focus on identity, pay attention to this very important conceptualization of collective intentionality, and then move to a discourse pragmatics that moves beyond the macro and the micro level and pays attention to intergroup communication, especially because morality and the meso level crucially come together, as the latter is the level of groups and their genre practices. Okay. Okay, so this second part has to do with how I applied, this framework to the study of cancel culture. And I applied it as I went, as it were, because, I had to start, I had to make decisions and, kind of come up with different ways of seeing things. So cancel culture is, in my view, a quintessential example of intergroup communication. So I'm going to briefly describe the project. I will talk about my questions, my research questions, results, discussion of findings, and some general conclusions. So this is my cancel culture project. First, I will define what cancel culture is. There are many definitions, but I like this one. I think it's really, really good. So the withdrawal of any kind of support, viewership, social media follows, purchases of products, for those who are assessed to have said or done something unacceptable or highly problematic, generally from a social justice perspective, alert to sexism, heterosexism, homophobia, racism, bullying, and related issues, adding ethnocentrism and anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and ageism. Norris emphasizes perception of moral offense as the common denominator of many triggers. So, we just have morality there popping up again, right? So this is the corpus that I have studied. You know, my corpus is 440,000 words long, and it's multimodal because it also has 200, includes 265 videos. It is not humongous, but all my work is qualitative. Or it's computer assisted discourse analysis. So I need to stay within manageable numbers of words, right? So I've looked at public individuals being called out in online public shaming. I looked at currents, as Camila mentioned. I've looked at influencers for whom cancellation is terrible, because that's the way they may lose their livelihood. And now I'm moving to the forgiven stage, the undoing degradation. I'm looking at J.K. Rowling's cancellation, which has been like the longest cancellation in history. Started like in 2019 and still ongoing. And so, as I said, it's qualitative in orientation. Corpus-assisted discourse analysis is multimodal, following and applying Norris's framework. And I've done a lot of thematic analysis. I've used Unconc, Sketch Engine, and NVivo as tools to analyze this data. But what I'm going to look at today are the 3 recent cases of cancellation across multiple social media platforms to capture different ethos of Rachel Nichols, Ellen DeGeneres, and Liz Cheney. Okay, so this is them. Ellen was canceled because people thought she was like not authentic, which is really bad. If you're a public persona, and for maintaining, that she pretended to be nice, but really she was not. She was really mean, really. And then the other reason was because she had like a very toxic environment people claim she had a very toxic environment in her show. Cheney was canceled because she was one of the few Republicans that voted for Trump's second impeachment. And then Rachel Nichols, maybe some of you may know less about her. She was a very famous ESPN presenter, host, and she was caught on tape making what was perceived a very racially charged remark about a colleague. Okay, so then we have J.K. Rowling, who's accused of being a exclusionary radical feminist at TERF, and then Hilaria Baldwin, who was accused of cultural appropriation because she made people believe that she was from Spain, and then people found out she was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Anyway, so these are my publications. This is the one that was published back in March that sort of contains everything, the whole project. And this is the one, that I told you I was working on. But, it's just like this project has grown, everything has taken me to like thinking about this and thinking about that, to developing more of a general proposal. So for these 3 cases, so remember that I was using this model. So I wanted to conceptualize cancel culture at the macro level, at the meso level, what practices, genres are involved in cancellation, how is cancellation realized at the macro level. And if you remember, I was very interested in seeing whether, light groups can become agents, especially thinking about online light groups. And this is the model, and I showed the Fair Club's model. So it really helped me distinguish between cancel culture, which is a macro level, abstraction representation type of discourse, different from cancellation, which is the genre ecologies. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, which were involved in Cheney's, DeGeneres, and Nichols cancellations, right? Because the genre ecology was super diverse. But one thing that they all had in common is the genre of user-generated comments. So that is what I decided to focus on for my micro-level analysis, right? So that is the micro level, that I focused on. So regarding the macro level analysis, I was thought that, it was a good way to conceptualize cancel culture as a big C conversation following G, which refers to the public debates about the discourses like affirmative action, abortion rights, feminism, that make up society and are thus all around us in the media and our interaction with others. In these types of debates, everybody involved has a good sense of what the sides are and what sorts of people tend to be on each side. For this, I did archival research. I looked at all the statistics that were available. But, most people agreed that there's a first wave of cancel culture in which it was seen as a tool of empowerment for disenfranchised communities, a way to exercise their power, to ignore the powerful, participate in public debates about morality, and to criticize systemic inequality rather than being an attack on individual transgressions. But then there was a second wave, which was the result of it being weaponized, like to a mob ruled by the right. If you hear, cancel culture is frequently invoked by conservative politicians and news outlets. So the most interesting for me was the meso-level analysis. It really took me a lot of thinking and trying to find ways about conceptualizing cancellation. I've been very interested in genres. I follow Miller in understanding genre as action. But what I found is that cancellation is the result of many different genres working together, right? And so I looked at different ways in which, genre scholars have looked at how genres come together. There are many, there's linear, there's many different ways. But I found this idea of genre ecologies, which are conceptualized as an open system framework. So a genre ecology includes an interrelated group of genres, artifacts, types, and the interpretive habits that have been developed around them, used jointly to accomplish complex objectives. This came really in handy, for realizing objectives of cancellation, which are the exposure of cancelees, making them face financial or legal consequences, and also social regulation in the sense, look what happened to this person. If you act in similar ways, this is going to happen to you, right? So all supported by moral values. So I'm going to show you this. This is my very primitive way of representing a genre ecology. So what I saw, for example, is that online presence is very influential. But at the end of the day, the people who canceled Cheney were the GOP, so the Republican Party, and the voters who did not re-elect her, right? So there was all these genres, so her participating in votes, at the House, governmental genres, articles, press releases, official documents, meetings with GOP leadership. She was sanctioned by Wyoming, by the Republican Party in Wyoming. Then she had to run it again. So there was this huge campaign. And then there was another person who was competing with her, Hageman, who, eventually was who defeated her, right? So, the ultimate counselor are not necessarily people, these light groups online, but certainly there is this hybridity between thick groups and light groups, between online and offline, that come together to carry out cancellation, right? And online comments are sort of, they reverberate what's going on, they push it, and are, sort of present everywhere, but are just a part of the very complex genre ecology that is needed to cancel somebody. So moving on to the a micro level, as I told you, out of all those genres, I focused on, many of them are occluded genres, so anyway, I would not have access to them. But, I'm interested in light groups, in online communication, so I focused on online comments. So what I found is that not two, but three distinct cancellation processes emerged. The first, just straight cancellation of the cancellee, Cheney, DeGeneres, Nichols. The second was, the second wave. So people complained about ESPN, the NBC, thinking they are too woke, they are letting themselves be influenced by, these mobs, right? So they should be canceled. We should not be watching ESPN. We should not be watching NBC, right? And then a third was when both the cancellee and the ultimate canceller are canceled. Like, for example, many people hated Cheney, many people hated Trump, Republican Party, so both of them should be canceled, right? So it was very complex. There was also all sorts of, if they are called mobs, there were many and running in very different directions. So what we see here, and looking back at what I said at the beginning about identity, these three cancellation types, the cancellee or the ultimate canceller and the group they are associated with are subject to radical identity reduction, oversimplification, and stigmatization. That is, we are all complex individuals, but once you are degraded, you are defined by a single negative balance attribute, like you're fake, you are racist, you are a rhino, which is a Republican in name only, and constitutionalist woke, right? So this is, reminds us of degradation ceremonies, which is the communicative work which transforms a person's entire status and identity to something lower. Importantly, looking at groups, degradation ceremonies are aggressive and collective process whereby an individual or group identity is debased and is tied to moral outrage, indignation, and public denunciation. So so not surprisingly, we see that processes of social identity claims, attributions, verification, and non-verification play an essential role in out-group formation. But I was interested in further probing how these very light online in-groups quickly gel and gain enough entitativity and agency to join or encourage other light or thick groups, as we've seen in the genre ecology, related to the vast array of contingent genres involved in each cancellation ecology, which, every single one is different. Okay, so I thought, that due to the key role that politeness and impoliteness plays in ratifying, modulating, and modifying the social relationships associated with certain social identities, the next part of the analysis focused on their manifestations in the corpus. Cancel culture and related practices are portrayed as punitive and aggressive phenomena that seek to disqualify cancellees and associated groups for perceived moral failings. So this particular corpus, as I've told you, is made up of online comments, a genre that is labeled as vernacular digital language, follows vernacular digital language conventions. So it can often be aggressive, use impolite and profane language. So therefore, the presence of impoliteness in the corpus was anticipated, which was the case, as the coding process unveiled 51%, over 51% of impoliteness. However, not anticipated at all was the almost equally significant presence of politeness with 48% total occurrences. So, however, if you just look at that, you say, wow, what's going on? But if there's, you use a coding metric query, to look for meaningful intersections, you will see that intergroup impoliteness was very important, and intragroup politeness was huge. So, so politeness and impoliteness were directed intragroup and intergroup respectively. So to further, another thing that I wanted to mention before I move on is that this is a polylogal setting. That means that when you are impolite to the out group, to the intergroup, you are constructing togetherness with your group, right? So these are very strategically used in that respect. So to further prove the data, I looked at the intersections between moral emotions and inter and intra-groups, and they were scrutinized through several related metrics codings as well. And the corpus here was coded following Haidt's moral emotions taxonomy. So as you can see, the moral emotion in the other condemning family was contempt. Together with anger and disgust, but contempt was really high up. So, however, another surprise, important as well, is the similar number of total occurrences of another emotion family, suffering, which is also other directed and encompasses sympathy and compassion. So sympathy is defined as an emotional response that involves both understanding and being moved by another's suffering or joy. So compassion adds to this the motivation to relieve that suffering. The results of the analysis showed that the highest percentage of suffering emotions was directed intra-group, right? So you see suffering emotions, again, intergroup, and very little intergroup, right? So this duality of emotions is not exceptional. Jasper rather says that, human, rather than just experiencing single emotions, emotions tend to combine in moral batteries. These emotional pairings are at the core of agency. Remember that I'm looking at agency without like groups. And these moral batteries indicate a direction for action away from the unappealing state towards the appealing one. Batteries of emotions, such as other condemning suffering, have been related to action and mobilization, as well as a strong group gelling mechanism. So associating with those who feel the same way you do feels like a safe option. So with this, I move to the conclusions of the applied part of the presentation, in which I review my findings for the macro, the meso, and the micro level analysis. So regarding the macro level, I conceptualize cancel culture as a big C conversation, but I problematize the existence of two neatly separated waves led by univocal mobs of clear and distinct political persuasion. Regarding the meso level, drawing from genre theory and genre ecologies, cancellation was described as an ad hoc assemblages of very diverse on and offline, non-occluded and occluded genres, which vary substantially from case to case, out of which the online common genre emerged as what may be argued is a sine qua non condition for cancellation, and was therefore selected to be the focus of the micro-level analysis. Despite this centrality, the meso-level analysis clearly established that CC is not just a collective endeavor or an online phenomenon, but a hybrid mixture of light and thick groups led by collective intentionality and a veritable example of the on-online nexus. Regarding the micro level, I compared micro level practices to degradation ceremonies, where identity is reduced to one negatively balanced attribute, and this leads us to the dark side of morality. These cancelees become seen as immoral beings, so lesser people, or they don't less human, and therefore we feel justified in being immoral to them, right? So it is this idea that when you dehumanize the other, right, you feel okay in treating them immorally. We saw very important synergies between intergroup impoliteness, intergroup politeness in this polylogal environment, and a very important synergy between condemning and suffering emotions. And these two synergies are seen as crucial to the emergence of entitativity and agency in light groups. So my view is that intergroup phenomena require an intergroup pragmatics. Cancel culture provides a quintessential example of intergroup communication. A good understanding of cancel culture requires for it to be seen as collective strategies of opprobrium and outrage among networks of like-minded people, using social pressure to achieve cultural ostracism of targets accused of offensive words and deeds. Cancel culture is a groupthink phenomenon driven by collective intentionality and morally motivated. Moral convictions underpin judgments of right and wrong, as well as the willingness to support and participate in violent collective action. So with this, I get to the end. I thank you very much for your attention. And I will try to, if you do have any questions and comments, respond to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pilar, for an inspiring and I would say deeply thought-provoking presentation. Very richly layered with lots of insights and things that I think we can apply to different contexts, not only the ones that you described. We have 10 minutes for questions, and I'll be happy to field those.
Mandy?
Yeah, Mandy, go ahead.
Thank you. That was a really interesting perspective, and I learned a lot from that. Obviously, you are sort of, I am, or maybe I should say, I am one of those people who is at the far individualist end of thinking. So I'm trying to think about how to bridge, you know, that gap. And actually something I have been thinking about, and one of perhaps paradoxically, one of the things that is attractive to me about this non-common ground view of communication is that I think it's a better model for understanding what I think of as public speech, like cases where you are engaging with this large sort of unknown audience. And something I wonder about, well, let's see, there's lots of things I wonder about. So to make this a question, rather than launching a long conversation, in the cases you're looking at, so in particular in the cancel, you know, these sort of cancellation programs, you still have individuals contributing utterances to a discourse.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see two ways of thinking about that. Either, so if you think about sort of the model of communication that I was presenting last night, you could think of an individual who is representing themselves as an individual, but they also have a representation of a large, not of their interlocutor, not as an individual, but as a group.
Mm.
And another possibility is that in those kinds of interactions, the individual represents themselves not as an individual, but they actually somehow represent themselves as a group,
yeah,
with an interlocutor who is a group. So I guess my question is, do either of those models make any sense to you?
Yeah, they do make sense. As one of the things is that individual and social identity are porous. So, we are individuals, and then, social identities are belonging to, the part of our identity that represents our belonging to groups, right? So I don't think you can establish like clear-cut differences. I would say that what happens, and what I've been, since I research mostly online communication, is that online communication fosters the saliency of social identity. Because, when you, especially with people you don't know, this type of live groups, so you do not participate as Pilar, you participate as somebody who's, I was going to say pro Trump, but I don't want to say that even, pro, X, right? So it is not me, it is what I represent. And I think, this is called this site model, is about a model of identity that talks about, the influence of anonymity on the presentation of self and the conceptualization of others. So, I don't think you can separate the individual from the social. but there are certain contexts in which that really foster the saliency of social identity. And what I think is that we have tools, we have developed very good tools for the individual, but not for the social. So that is my my push, that we have to start thinking about that. Not necessarily that I have all the answers or what I have developed answers them, but it is a way to start thinking in the along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dale, I think. Dale?
Oh, yes. Thanks for a really thoughtful analysis of cancel culture. But it seemed to me that your analysis doesn't really doesn't go to the end of what cancel culture seeks, and that is a real life consequence. For example, the opprobrium heaped upon the Union of South Africa while it was still an apartheid state successfully shamed corporations which engaged in trade and support for the South African apartheid regime. So that was really what the moral opprobrium was a means to the end. In the case of on the conservative side, Liz Cheney, the end was to get her removed from Congress, and that, of course, was successful. Again, it seems to me that the opprobrium is a means to an end. The opprobrium is not the end in itself.
Well, I completely agree, and that's why I talked about the ultimate counselor. The ultimate counselor is the group in whose hands the cancellation is, right? Which is the GOP or the voters in Wyoming. But all of these people effectively lost their jobs and lost their programs and were canceled. So, but this started online, perhaps, like in the case of Ellen, it was a tweet that just generated everything. But at the end of the day, this went all the way up to NBC and her show was canceled, right? So the opprobrium is just a means to an end, and that's why I distinguish between, counselors and ultimate counselors, that in whose hands it is to really cancel somebody. So I agree. I agree. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have time for another couple of questions. Yes, Tanya.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. It was a great talk, gave me so much to think about. I have a very specific question that I'm thinking should be pretty easy to answer. I myself am very interested in politeness, and on one of the charts you had the number of comments in the corpus, intergroup, intragroup, politeness, and politeness. And I was just wondering how those were quantified, exactly how those were counted.
I used NVivo and coded for politeness and impoliteness for all the strategies.
Okay.
So like, for example, in a comment, I would go one by one, the strategies of politeness, the strategies of impoliteness, and then count. That's how. But I only counted one per comment. To make it fair, as it were. And then it is really complicated. These things are really fuzzy. It is not an easy task. But just encoding and having a co-coder helps. And that's the way I did it with NVivo and just bottom-up coding.
Okay. And so then just one comment would either be polite or impolite.
No, in one comment, there could be, like
Okay.
many different strategies. But for example, if there was like 5 insults, I would only count insult. You know what I mean?
Okay.
For
Yes.
one.
Yes.
But you know, usually, and this is what I was saying, most people who look at politeness, they look at politeness. Most people who look at impoliteness look at impoliteness. But hey, there's tons of politeness. There's, you know, so I was really surprised because when you think about how these identities get verified, non-verified, and so on, you think mostly about impoliteness. But there was tons of politeness, right? And so, and then another thing is that, you know, the intragroup and the intergroup are not static. You know, that's why you could not, I think this would be impossible to do from a quantitative perspective, because you really have to see sequence and analyze audience in every single, you know, who is the audience or the target for this particular comment. I don't know whether I answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, good.
We have a question from Ashley, and I think this will be our last question. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for a very great presentation.
Okay.
So this made me think a lot of one of my favorite studies, which you may be familiar with. Basically, the Huffington Post did some experimenting with their comment structure a couple years back, and it started out completely anonymous, and there were, you know, obviously there's a lot of poor behavior, and then they briefly went to a sort of setup where you could make an account, you had to make an account, but you didn't have to use your real name. It was specific to the Huffington Post. And then they switched to Facebook. And somewhat counterintuitively, the behavior got much better when it was like you had a local account. But the moment they went to Facebook, it didn't get as bad as completely anonymous, but it got worse because people, in the interpretation is that people were suddenly aware of other audiences and other parts of their identity. And I wonder if you have thoughts about how that might fit into your research.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great example. Well, one of the things that I try to do is to have like a polymedia approach where I got data from many different platforms, because every single platform has an ethos, right? So if you just focus on Twitter, you're going to have results that are very different than if you get something from, say, responses to comments posted on Fox News, you know. But I mean, they are part of the conversation. This is a big C conversation, so everybody has to be included. So I think, you know, it sounds to me that what you are describing is the ethos of each, you know. It's just like, I come here and I'm going to the, you know, I can behave, you know, normatively. I can behave in these different ways. And then, you know, I would say that, you know, there's always power in numbers. Even if you misbehave, you know, you are like one of 3 million people who, you know, responded. So that gives you some sort of, you know, level of anonymity in a way, you know, which I think, you know, going back to Durkheim, it's the idea that it is the presence of others that make us moral beings. But when we feel that, you know, we're alone, or we don't know, you know, people don't know who we are, then, you know, morality goes out the door. So thank you. That was, I'll try to find it. Thank you.
I can send you the link.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think our time for the plenary session is up. And so in order to respect the integrity of the schedule and people's commitments, let's thank Professor Blitvich again, and then we'll, I think I'll turn it over to Anne to announce the awardees.
Thank you.
To unmute. Thank you very much, everybody, for sticking it out to the end. Well, first of all, thanks, Pilar. That was a very excellent end to our session here for the last couple of days. I do want to, my job here is just to announce the graduate student winners. As you probably know, it was designated as a travel award, and there was no travel ultimately. But given that people had been promised this money, we felt like we would go ahead and award these anyway and call them presentation awards. And I hope you can see the names of the 6 winners on the screen over here. So Emma Corbeau from Université Paris, Kaylee Fisher from USC, Shannon Gallion from USC, Susie Park from Yonsei, Yulia Reichova from Mississippi, and Shuang Ye from Wisconsin-Madison. And by the way, while I'm on this slide, I might just, or this page, I might just also make this point. Membership fees are, the reason we collect membership dues is to be able to fund these awards, but we also have, want to use this money to sponsor off-year events. So the next AMPRA-7 will be in 2026, but in 2025, we would really like to have some kind of off-year event. In 21, Alejandro Perini had a really nice online symposium hosted from Argentina that hosted a lot of our colleagues from South America who we rarely get to hear from. And then last year we had a graduate school council organized workshop on experimental pragmatics. And in 2025, we would like to have some event as well. And if anybody has any ideas that they would like to float by me, we do have one possible idea, but if anybody else wants to nominate or get involved in that, please do contact me. As to AMPRA 2026, we don't have a venue yet, but we hope within the next few months we will have a venue, and we will send you information about that in due course. And before I hand the floor back to Camilla, I would just also like to say that I really want to thank Camilla very much. The fact that this was able to be put on online at such short notice may have seemed like a miracle, but it was all resting on the very hard work that Camilla had done over months and months and months, you know, from eliciting abstracts from you, reviewing the abstracts, collecting reviewers to do these abstract reviews, putting together a fantastic schedule that really gelled very nicely, and putting it all online, and then of course doing all the registration thing, setting up a registration page, collecting all of this was months and months of extremely hard work. And I really do think that Camilla needs all the thanks for this organization, and of course her team. With that, I hope you all, thank you, all of you, for showing up. And we had very good attendance over these 3 days. I think that's fantastic. Thank you. I know it's very exhausting to be online for long periods of time. So you are all to be applauded as well. And thank you to the 3 plenary speakers who were fantastic. I think all told, it was a very, very successful AMPRA-6, even though, you know, obviously it would have been better to be in Florida. But yeah, that's life. Okay, Camilla, I'll turn over to you.
Thanks, Anna. And of course, I want to reciprocate the thanks and say that I can think of no better colleague to be stuck in a crisis with than you. So you've been amazing throughout this. Thank you very much. I'm blown away by everybody's participation. I was going over the schedule this morning. I think I'm not really that great with numbers. We had around 80 talks, let's say, originally scheduled. And I know that I think only 3 were no-shows, and in some cases it was because people couldn't get here, and who knows what that number would have been like in person as well. So and I'm grateful to all of you, not just for sharing your scholarship, but also for being such great colleagues to each other. So was really moving to see kind of the levels of interest and participation. I will, and unfortunately, we didn't get the in-person networking part of this, the informal chats over coffee or a beer or whatever, but I will encourage you to follow up with colleagues whose talks you found interesting and inspiring, and send emails and reach out and do that networking sort of post-conference. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, anybody who needs a certificate of participation, please go ahead and email the AMPRA email, and we'll try to get those out. We'll also be doing partial reimbursement, so our work is not done yet. And then, of course, huge thanks to Anna and friends and colleagues in South Carolina, and then also to my dedicated group of helpful students. So when I put out the call, who wants to volunteer for the conference, when we thought we were all going to be in person, everybody said yes. So, and I think we felt that spirit throughout the sessions with our students who were helping host sessions. So I want to thank Benjamin, Francesca, Hugh, Jihei, Kubra, Maria, Memory, Melike, Nafla, Sarah, Savannah, Shan, Shangyu, Yuchuan, and of course, colleague Judith Bridges. Hopefully I didn't forget anybody, but thanks again to all of you for making this possible and for being here and attending the talks. So I hope that everybody enjoys a beautiful afternoon wherever you are.
Haley, if you're still on, can you stay on for a sec?